So sometimes when we get into theory of the firm, we talk so much about these other things that we forget about our old friends demand and supply. So let's just go back and revisit and see, wait a minute, where is demand and supply in theory of the firm? Well, demand's been there the whole time. We don't always put it on the average revenue curve, but remember, for perfect competition, the demand curve, and actually for not perfect competition, the demand curve is always equal to average revenue if there's no price discrimination. I haven't taught you about this yet, it's a concept that's coming. But if that's not there, if there's no price discrimination, and again, this just means that I can charge one group of people a different price than another group of people because I know who has higher demand. There's nothing sinister about the word discrimination here. Anyway, as long as that's not occurring, then the demand curve is the average revenue curve. There's no difference. Supply is a bit more tricky. It's a little bit harder to find here. So, keep in mind what the supply curve shows. First and foremost, it shows the law of supply. That is, that as price goes up, the quantity supplied will also go up. So what we might see on the supply curve is that when price goes from 1 to 2, quantity supplied goes from 10 to 20. And what's really important about this is that the supplier is saying, for me to produce 10, I have to get a price of 1. For me to produce 20, I have to get a price of 2. For me to produce 30, I have to get a price of 3. You notice, perhaps, that that's not entirely different from the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns. And in fact, the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns is part of the justification of the supply curve, though it's not a perfect fit. So again, the supply curve is making this statement, if the price is this, I'll produce that. Well, we're not going to see that perfectly here. There's a few problems in theory of the firm or with the marginal cost curve to make it the supply curve. So let's do a little bit of examining. Let's look at the price 1. Here it was very clear cut. If the price is 1, I'll produce 10. Or for me to produce 10, I have to get a price of at least 1. Well, we don't get the same dynamic here. Here, if we look at just the marginal cost curve, it's saying if the price is 1, I could produce Q1 or Q2. That's different. Another observation is that the supply curve is positively sloped and the marginal cost curve has this negative slope to it in the first part. Now that goes away after this point, right? So, okay, we could get rid of that objection here, like the rest of marginal cost is positively sloped. But then we have another problem. Remember, the supply curve says, if the price is this, I will produce some positive number, and if the price goes up, I'll produce even more. Well, that's not true for all of the marginal cost curve. Remember, if you look at the previous video about shutting down, if the price is less than variable costs, it doesn't make sense for me to produce, and I should shut down. So, if this is a profit maximizer, and we assume that it is, what we can see here is if I take 1 across to Q2, and then I increase the price to 2, the law of supply says, well, then you would produce more. But since both Q2 and Q3, or should I say 1 and 2, since both of those prices are less than AVC, well, Q2 is really 0. How much will they produce? Well, nothing. They would shut down. Well, what if I raise the price to 2? They still produce nothing. So we don't see the law of supply in here. So that's why we can't really call it the supply curve. But once we get above AVC, so if we go from 3, if we make the price 3, Q4, some positive number would be produced. And if I raise the price from there, now we see our law of supply. Now we see the supply relationship to quantity supplied, the price relationship. Now we see that in effect. So the best that we can say, and it's not a perfect fit, but we say the supply curve is pretty much equal to marginal cost if we're looking at the part of marginal cost that has a positive slope, and if it's greater than AVC, and if, and this is a really big if it's perfect competition, which we know doesn't really exist. So when we introduce the other models of competition other than perfect competition, when we introduce those, there really is no supply curve. The profit motive and the price setting power is too strong. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.